Hello, and welcome to the Decode podcast. We talk all things headless WordPress and modern web development on the show, and we're very grateful to have some great guests with us today. I'm Kellen Mace, and with me, as always, is Will Johnston. Say hi, Will.
Hey, guys.
Yeah, and with us, as I said, are some great guests. We have Cassidy Williams, Ben Hung, and Tara Meniskis from the
that's the best version I have ever heard. That's amazing. I sound like a doctor.
I used to be in healthcare, so I think that was shining through. My apologies.
I nearly tore my meniscus at one point in time.
Yeah.
Don't tear a meniscus.
But dude,
I like it. I'm sticking with it. I'm changing my last name.
Oh man, this is off to a great start.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Don't apologize. It's fantastic.
All right.
Menixic or Manisic works.
Menixic. How do you say it? What do you?
So I say Menixic.
All right. Menixic. All right.
I think we should keep that.
I'm really sorry.
Yeah, I think that blooper was
keep
great.
this take. Don't cut this in post-prod.
Never change.
Never change. Redo. I'm trying again. Menixic. All right, there we go. Welcome to the Decode podcast. We talk all things headless WordPress and modern web development on this show, and we're very grateful to have some great guests with us today. I'm Kellen Mace from the WP Engine Developer Relations team, and with me, as always, is my co-host Will Johnston. Say hi, Will.
Hey.
And with us today as guests, we have three members of the Netlify Developer Experience team. We have Tara Menixic, Ben Hung, and Cassidy Williams. So thank you all for being on with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Hello.
Very happy to have you all. If you haven't heard of these folks, you've been under a rock or something like that, because they're everywhere in this space, I think, in the Jamstack and modern, web development space, producing lots of great content across many different, popular JavaScript frameworks. And you may know Cassie in particular from like her hilarious videos. They're pretty legendary at this point. So you have some fans on our team at WP Engine.
What?
For the
Man.
videos. But with that,
I do like the memes.
Yeah, they're awesome. So with that, we'll dive into some things. We'll talk turkey now. What we really wanted to have the team on to talk about is this kind of cross section of this Jamstack architecture that their company and a lot of their educational material is centered around, and then WordPress as a headless CMS, which of course Will and I spend a lot of our time thinking about and working with, and kind of talking about that cross section for when that's a good decision to use WordPress, which is historically a traditional monolithic WordPress CMS, to use that in a headless fashion and pair it with or use it in a Jamstack architecture, and see what kind of pros or cons that gives us, and it's explore that a bit. So to kick things off, we'll just ask our guests here, like in the past, have you worked with WordPress as a developer ever, or even as a user, just familiar with like the admin UI and how to work with it?
Yeah, I've used regular WordPress as a user quite a bit. When I say regular, I mean non-headless, although probably headless too. I don't know. Anyway, I've used that plenty just for like publishing blog posts or contributing blog posts to various publications and stuff. But then as a developer, I admit I haven't used WordPress in quite a few years. Headless, I've done headless CMS work, but in terms of building with it, it's been a minute.
Got it. Yeah, and I noticed to change gears a bit from there. I noticed recently, like Netlify came out with the Jamstack Community Survey 2021, and I'm interested to see like what the results of that are when they come out, and took it myself as a user, and I was kind of surprised to see that there are quite a few questions on it centered around WordPress. Users who take it are asked, have you used or would you consider using WordPress as a headless CMS, and questions about like how you would host that backend and so on. So as you know, as guests who are very plugged into the Jamstack ecosystem, and probably see like tons of people out there in the community having various combinations of technologies, is using WordPress as a headless CMS something you see kind of commonly? And do you expect that to increase, or do you think it's more of a niche thing and it would stay as popular as it is now?
One of the biggest things, and like why it was like a big part of the questions too, is that WordPress sites are a huge percentage of the internet. And as we see it when we move forward, I speak for every single person that used the Jamstack, just to be clear. Like
all of them,
every single one. When we see the future of the web, we like to see things decoupled. Because there are, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this a lot, but a lot of really great benefits about it, including you can incorporate more people into the development process because you don't need as a high skill level to maybe fill out the CMS, or tech skill level, I should say. High skill levels all around. But because like when I was first using WordPress back in my day, I used it a lot when I worked with this volunteer group, Southwest Ohio Give Camp, and we worked with nonprofits. So they would pair like every side of the tech industry, people would come in and volunteer, and they would pair us with a nonprofit, and we would work on their site. And like 97.9257 of the percent of the time, it was WordPress. Yes. It was hard not to do a radio station. I was like 97.3%. But I mean, it was like almost always WordPress. So when you have a nonprofit, like you don't always have the resources to be like, I'm going to just grab an engineer for every single part of this site. So to be able to incorporate more people is like the goal for a lot of different sites. And so I think the future with the Jamstack approach, like having WordPress be headless, is taking a lot of these WordPress sites that we want a lot of people to contribute to, and make it so it's decoupled, so that you can have more people like content providers and like different like admin and all kinds of things that need done on your site, done through WordPress's UI, which is like really, really familiar and great for people to use.
Yeah, I'd say that's a lot of what we work with at WP Engine, is just publishers, by necessity have used WordPress for so long because of maybe budget constraints, or they just don't have access to developers all the time. And WordPress over the years has made it very easy for you to go, you install your theme, you have your site running, and then you can make some small updates and adjustments to it over time. For better or worse, you have a lot of flexibility there. And so what we focus on is trying to help bring that publisher experience to a headless world. And so you can still use the tools you're familiar with in WordPress as a publisher, but you get all of the benefits of the headless world, which most of our viewers at this point, and I'm sure you guys are very familiar with what the benefits are.
Although the headless world sounds terrifying.
Not a world where I want to live, or could live. Need my head.
I mean, I feel like I live in a headless world most of the
time. Yeah, that's what Will described is something we see pretty commonly. WP Engine, where we work, is one of the largest hosts for WordPress sites, many of which are large publishing sites, and they have some opinionated marketing teams who love WordPress. They're like, we have these editorial workflows set up, and WordPress has just been this rock solid CMS with 20 years of like thought leadership baked into the content authoring and editing experience. We want that, but then on their team, they might work closely with technical folks who are becoming very enamored with these modern JavaScript frameworks and building in a component architecture, and also being able to pull in multiple sources into your site, rather than just assuming the CMS that does all the rendering, 100% of my data is coming from there, and you're not pulling it from other places. So So I think a lot of those developers and those technical folks are looking for a way to like reconcile those two worlds and still give the marketing teams, the good experience and allow them to use the CMS that is free and open source and, suits their needs really well, but also allows them to leverage, these newer JS frameworks and technologies and so on. So with that said, I wanted to get your thoughts on like, if you think those can peacefully coexist, like, is there room for both of those? And we get into this, like, I want to refer back to one of a previous episode we've done on this podcast, where we talked about this, I don't want to call it a feud, but a little disagreement between Matt Mullenweg, the co-founder of WordPress, and Matt Billman, the founder and CEO of Netlify, and use that to kind of set the stage. So if you're not familiar, Matt Mullenweg, the co-founder of WordPress, he did an interview and it was posted on a publication, I believe it was The Next Web. They were asking him, like, what do you think of this newfangled Jamstack thing? Is that the future? Is that taken over? And he was pretty harsh with some of his comments. He made the comment, I think, that architecture is a regression for the majority of users adopting it, which is pretty strong words. And some of his reasons behind that,
fighting words
from them are fighting words. Yeah. Some of his reasoning, from what I can recall, are his reasoning is that when you break up your architecture into multiple parts, instead of having a monolith, then you're only as strong as like the weakest link, right? So I think it was seeing these Jamstack sites that were outsourcing their auth and their and pulling data from Salesforce and from WordPress and from various APIs or whatever, and thinking like, well, if one of those goes down, now all of a sudden your site's throwing errors. Whereas if you have a monolith, there's a single point of failure. Not to mention it's completely open source software and it's been through at this point thousands and thousands of security tests, and it's pretty ironclad in that sense. So there's that part of it, and just the fact that you can achieve quick loading sites with it as well, right? In the interview, he says you can turn on full page caching for your WordPress site. You can put all of your static assets on a CDN and serve those from around the globe and achieve these very good lighthouse scores. So from a usability UX standpoint, it's very good. And and it's single point of failure. So you're not kind of distributing things across several services. You're keeping it all in house. And I got this sense that he has a if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mentality about it. And it's not to say WordPress isn't progressing and moving forward. They're putting a lot of time and energy into the new Gutenberg block editor, which is providing this like really nice React based editing and authoring experience in WordPress admin. And he's not slowing down or stagnating, certainly, and neither is the project. Like, it's progressing. But as far as where the rendering happens, whether the CMS owns it or if it's done, somewhere else, I think that's the point of contention. So anyways, all of that happened. And then I believe it was on Twitter, Matt Billman said, like, I vehemently disagree. I think, these Jamstack architectures are more the future, and WordPress can be a part of that, but that could be a data source of many. And I think he had some rebuttals for some of the points that Matt raised. I think it ultimately culminated into like a fireside chat that they had at a conference where they kind of duked it out a bit, where they, think for what they thought, the web is headed. So yeah, with all that framework
I even
laid,
just like these
like
fighting words and duking it out for these two Matts. Like, just can't even picture that.
Yeah, they're both Matts.
They're both pretty chill Matts, I think. Fair point. But anyways, I've been rambling for a while. Like, I'd love to know your thoughts on it. Do you think like these folks who are like, I like the WordPress's theme API and writing my templates in PHP is fine, has worked great for a while, and if I can achieve quick speeds, and it does what I need it to, why can't I just keep doing that? Versus others who say, the future is in a decoupled architecture and that's more advantageous. What would you tell those folks wrestling with that?
I think, well, if you look at that fireside chat, or if you were there, or if you've looked at the articles, neither of them are necessary. Neither of them are necessarily wrong, depending on who you are. A lot of this depends on your development teams and the types of approaches that they're more comfortable with. I know, like, for myself, for example, probably from my teammates. We have definitely subscribed to that Jamstack architecture style of decoupling because yes, there's multiple points of entry into this application because of all the different services, but then there's also multiple points where if just one part of the application goes down, it's just that one part, not the whole thing. Meanwhile, with a monolith, yes, you turn on one switch, the whole thing works, but then also if one part of it works, the whole thing falls down. So the argument that I almost said the argument that Matt made, either one of them, they
Right.
You know the
both,
one.
you know what I'm talking about. Like they're both not wrong. Both of these types of approaches have excellent points of success and excellent ways of failing, I guess I could say. Or ways of debugging and working with those types of failures. And I know for myself in particular, I really like building the decoupled way because then I kind of get to choose what kind of Lego building blocks I want to make with my applications. And every one of those Lego building blocks, I can swap out. And so if I want to change my authentication system, for example, I swap out just that one block. I don't have to rewrite the entire application because it's just an API that I'm interfacing with. And same thing with if I want to change out my UI, if I want to change out my CMS, all of that is just a building block. And that when I think of a more monolith type of architecture, it's more like instead of building a Lego brick castle, it's like you have a beautifully knit castle and you have to like undo some stitches here and there and kind of rebuild certain parts of this castle because it's all very intertwined because it is this monolith architecture. And some people like that. And I totally understand why it's nice to have this one big code base that handles everything. And then some people don't. They like being able to just swap in things in and out, debug only specific parts of it. And it also allows a lot of your team members to specialize in certain technologies and different parts of the architecture too. And so if you do want to swap something out or you do want to upgrade something, you can focus on the people who specialize in authentication rather than having the entire team figure out what all has to change in order for this service to be updated or something like that.
Get back to your original question, like, is there room in the world for these both to exist? Yes. And, that's how our world of technology works. And that's how we get a lot of innovation in the tech industry is because, developers in general constantly want to rewrite everything. So we have, a lot of things and a lot of options. And guess what? There are so many websites and so many ways that we can approach applications that there is plenty of room. If you even want to make a third thing out there, go ahead.
Yeah. And I think that's important to build on what Tara is saying is because I think a lot of times the conversation with tech has always been about like this like winner take all idea. And I think the JavaScript framework wars, if you want to call them, showed enough that like there's room for everyone. It's not like one took over and the rest just disappeared, right? Kind of, I feel like gone are the days where jQuery was the sole thing that everyone used. And then like now we have a lot more options and choice. And I think that's a good thing in addition to like the innovation, because what you end up getting is really like the choice to tailor like solutions to different problems. And I think the moment you try to impose one type of methodology, you end up with an exception somewhere. And so as long as we acknowledge those trade-offs, I think then teams can make the right choice for their basically setup and their problems that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, I agree with all of you there. And I think specifically on the point Cassidy mentioned where it's nice to be able to work on like the authentication piece, and then maybe there's the CMS piece, and then there are some other pieces that you're hooking in. That to me, in a WordPress world where you have this monolith or the traditional WordPress monolith world, you can kind of do that, but all of your data is available all the time in WordPress. So it's very easy for a lot of like kind of crosstalk and some tightly coupled issues to pop up in WordPress that you're not aware of. And WordPress, you might, Matt Mullenweg argues that in WordPress, you have this monolith, and in the headless Jamstack world, you have all these different pieces. One breaks down and your site breaks down. It's like in WordPress world, if you have some plugin that breaks down, it's going to cause trouble. So it's kind of the same. It's just in a different
The
format,
same.
right? And
Right.
we're
Yeah.
always tackling the same challenges, and various, whether it's Jamstack or even within Jamstack, all the different tools that you have access to, they tackle these challenges in different ways. And so you, as a development team or a product team, can determine what's best for you based on, like Ben said, based on the challenge you're trying to solve and based on the makeup of your team, whether they are well versed in a particular technology versus another.
I
Yeah.
think that's one thing that like we always have this saying that's a kind of a joke. It's like same but different. Like I think that's like a very common thing in tech. I used to work for a component library where I did like tutorials and examples through React Vue and Angular, like red, green, blue. And people would be like, oh, you know, how is it working with one and then, context switching to the other? And I'm like, it's the same. Like, I'm like building out a skeleton. I'm working with components. It's like, it's pretty dang similar for how much talk we have. So like you're saying with like the plugins and things, you'll see a lot more similarity than warrants all of the arguments of how things are different.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to be able to pick sides and be like, I'm team Vue, I'm
Right.
team React, stuff like that. Like so many times when people are just like, well, Cassidy, she is definitely team React. She does not like Vue. I'm like, I don't dislike Vue. I just don't use it. And I think that's where, just like what Ben was saying, just like what all of us have been saying, it's not about who's going to win. There's definitely room for everybody. And there's people who are just comfortable with different styles of architecture, and you just depends on the team that you join.
Yeah, it reminds me of an expression I've heard, and I think it's so true. It's like when you're by the time you become a senior developer, you realize the correct answer to almost everything is it depends on the
Depends.
Yeah.
circumstances, right? Like what skills does the team have? What does this application need to accomplish? What is the hosting situation? Like all of these things factor in, and you make a decision at the end of the day. Another thing I'm thinking of is an embarrassing story that I think it would be
Ooh.
great to tell on a
Does it have to do with depends?
This is
Yeah, don't. We can save that for
Nice
another
one.
day if it does.
Nice one. No, I promise it does not. This one is when the DevRel team was getting spun up, and we first created our site, which is based on Next.js, our developers.wp engine site, where a lot of our educational content and stuff is lives there. It's a Next site, and we had hooked it up to a WordPress backend to pull data there, and a mistake was made where WordPress was something was changed, and WordPress was throwing a 500 error, right? But because our site was statically rendering the pages, our Next site, it continued to work just fine. So for like, it took us like several days, like people took off for the weekend. No one even realized. We came back and we're like, oh, turns out the WordPress backend's been down for like several days, right? But in that case, it was because of the this fallback to using the stale resources.
Mhm.
Next just continued to serve those up because it wasn't able to regenerate it. And as soon as our site was back online, then it was able to do a stale well revalidate kind of thing and refresh those pages and so on. But that whole example going through that, now we have uptime monitoring and so on. We're getting set up on that site. So anyways, that would be the way to find out about those kinds of issues for our listeners out there. But I just say that to illustrate the fact that like maybe this decoupling doesn't always mean more fragile. Maybe sometimes it can even mean more resilient, right? Where one of these services goes down, you can fall back to your static assets or whatever it may be. So I think that's you can rebut some of that stuff.
Yeah.
So with all that said, like I was next kind of thinking to myself what you all would recommend to others. Let's say you're at a cocktail party and somebody says, hey, I'm getting into this web development stuff. I have this client. They it's a small shop, low stakes project, but it's this small shop and locally here in town, and they use WordPress as their site. They just have this theme that's like old and slow, and they want to make over, they want to kind of throw out what they have and make things over. And they like that platform though. They want to stay on WordPress. How do you think I should build the new site. And they were open to these options of continuing to, use WordPress as a monolith and just, slap a new theme on it and maybe optimize the queries and get some caching in place and so on to speed things up. Or would you say, Jamstack's where it's at, you need to develop, you need to turn that into an API, and then you can have, some kind of a JavaScript application that pulls data from that. Like, I know that's your preference, and it is mine too. I'm very sold on the decoupled idea. But for this person, they might look at that and go, yeah, but then there's two code bases. I have the WordPress code, and then I have my front end code. I have to manage two things. I want something easy for this, small time client. So isn't one code base better? Like, what would you tell that person?
I think if I was at a cocktail party, I'd be like, hey, listen. Probably yes. Yeah. I'm like, listen,
have I mentioned I love
you're
you?
Beautiful. But I think I feel like my first ask is always, what is your team? What is your team and what do you want your team to be? Because like, if you're like, well, I have 3 engineers, but we need to be working on features. So it's like, what's your goals and what is your team? Because you only have so many resources, and that's how it is. Like, you can't just magically have a new person that's just going to migrate for you. So if you don't have the team to do that, then you have to maybe looking at something like more of a quick build, and then on the side you want to make your static WordPress site and like start there, where that you can eventually start decoupling things, and like you have your local WordPress, and then you do the static WordPress, and like can maybe do small bits over. But if you're in for the long haul, you're like, I am so tired of whatever my setup is now, I want to completely revamp, then there are like great ways for you to kind of just like chip away and like start things over. But let alone transferring data in general with headless CMSs, it's like just data. Data's hard. So
it's a nightmare.
But yeah, I would try to get all those words out as if I could not slur them.
Right.
You did great, Tara.
I am having 3 cocktails right now, so I'm glad I got that out.
You're reminding me, you're on point talking about the skills that are on the team, right? Because that weighs very heavily on the decision, of course. You're reminding me of a previous interview that we've done on the podcast. We talked to this guy, Drew Baker, who has an agency called Funk House. And these folks have, by this point, they've built and launched like over 40 headless WordPress sites that have a decoupled front end built in Nuxt. That's their preferred architecture. And some of his comments kind of floored me. He said like, yeah, we are a WordPress shop and we build, WordPress sites, but we don't write PHP anymore. And I don't hire PHP developers. It's too hard to find skilled PHP developers these days. A lot of the emphasis is on JavaScript, and I'm able to find like skilled developers who have that skill set. So what they do is they have WordPress running as their backend, and they define all their post types and metadata and taxonomies and whatever they need there. And then they flip on WP GraphQL, which exposes all of that as a GraphQL data layer. And they just give that to the front end devs and say, go to town, building out anything you need. You can query the data graph to get whatever data you need. No one is writing SQL queries or even, PHP stuff to pull that out. So that's pretty amazing to me. If you would have told me, if someone told me 5 or 10 years ago, like, yeah, I'm going to build this site, I'm going to use WordPress for it, and it's going to be have completely custom data types and custom views and so on, and we're not going to touch any PHP, I would say, what do you mean? That's what it is. That WordPress is that, and that's what it uses to do the programming. But yeah, with these APIs, particularly WP GraphQL, it's like this brave new world of just pulling JSON data. You don't really care, like under the hood, what language is doing the work to, pull it out of the database and get it to you in that form. So it's pretty cool to me.
I think that being said, I think if I put on my agency hat for a second, and I used to be in that world, and it's always a challenge when you're working with, especially with a local business. You really need to understand what their aspirations are in terms of the business, where it's headed. Is it always going to stay? Say you're working with like a local pizza shop or something. Is their plan to always be a local pizza shop? If that's the case, are they always going to have a developer that they can get on the phone to make changes to their site if they're, having trouble? Or do they need a site that's just going to work for them forever and they need a new skin because their site looks like it was built in the early 2000s? Or are they a pizza shop that wants to franchise someday and hopes to overtake, Papa John's or something? And if that's the case, then maybe you come up with a solution for them that works right now. And then, like Tara said, you start to decouple one piece at a time of their site until as they scale, and you think about that. But I really think I've built plenty of sites for local businesses that are more mom and pop shops, and to bring in a full decoupled site with a bunch of different APIs and stuff, it's like you're really asking for more challenges than you want to, because down the line they're going to need changes, but they won't be able to afford it, and then they're really going to be stuck.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. I would almost like, there are some parts about that I think are true, but then also parts of it that I think decoupling kind of makes it easier, I might say, for the fact that, like, if you're dealing with a headless CMS and you just need to hire a dev to do your front end, and then you have contact with people that do your identity for you. So like, kind of just like, if you are able to, I know, like, that can mean the bill can be more than maybe trying to do it all yourself, but sometimes, you gotta pay money to make money. But I mean, like, just basically delegating as much as possible could be a route. Just saying. Yeah, certainly. I was wondering, I'd like to get your opinion on what you think of as you kind of survey the headless CMS options that are out there. Like, WordPress is one player in that game, but there's lots of others, Sanity and Contentful and Prismic and so on. How do you think they like measure up? Do you have one or two that you think are doing things right, or that you aren't particularly keen on? And just generally speaking, like, do you think anything is missing from these headless CMS solutions that you'd like to see introduced?
What I really like, Prismic is my current favorite right now, and it's because of their component system, they call it slices. And what's cool is you can create different slices like a pizza with different toppings, or rather it's different pieces of components. And so I could say I want like an avatar component, and that will have like a picture, a name, and a title or something. And then I can create page components that are composed of all of the different slices. And I really like that model of componentizing it, because it makes sense in my React developer brain, where I can be just like, okay, whenever there's going to be this type of slice, when I get that from the CMS, I can just work with it, style it, and do whatever I need. And so they just have a really good way of defining that from the CMS side, so that when a user is using it, when someone is updating the website, they don't see that these are different components. They just see that they need to fill out the page. But it makes CMS developers or people building the pages with the CMS, they're able to treat it as a system that they can build with. I think it's a really smart way of doing it. And a lot of CMSs have similar types of features like that, but I really like how Prismic's doing it so far.
Nice.
And
any others?
An interesting trend I would actually go outside the bubble with actually is I'd say Notion as a CMS is kind of an interesting one.
Oh yeah.
Because it's still kind of immature, I would say. I play with the API. It's a little bit difficult to work with at the moment. But the idea that people can kind of write and take notes naturally and have that become the CMS rather than feeling like you're filling out a form, I think could be a kind of a new pattern that emerges with how people kind of like manage their content. And I think there is kind of a trend growing in that direction. So more like taking notes rather than filling out a form kind of trend. So it'd be interesting to see kind of where that goes as far as like how people manage that.
Right.
I just have to say, if you don't know, Ben is a magician with Notion. So
Yes.
if you think you know Notion, let me tell you, you don't. because the stuff that
Nice.
he does with Notion is just like, oh my gosh, it's
Mind-blowing.
made everything that we can do with Notion so much better.
Just
So-
lots of linked databases and tables where if I create a task in the board for our stand-up, it'll automatically be under like my own personal dashboard he made for me, where it lists all the tasks that I've done in a given
Sweet.
week, and then also meetings that I've been in. And so Notion is Ben's superpower.
Amazing. Ben, we go way back. I know. I thought I knew you, and I thought your thing was Obsidian. Or is
Yes,
It
it
is.
is
also
Yes, as well.
That's
Yeah.
a whole other level.
okay?
Yeah.
That's a whole nother topic.
What is the not double brain? What is the thing?
Triple
The brain-
threat?
Well, Ben's lots of brain things. I feel like there's like 2 brain thing, but Ben has maybe 4 or 5. He can.
Oh, second brain and
Second
like
brain.
third brain. There you
Yeah,
go.
he's got like
Second brain.
quadrupleized brain.
He's
yeah.
got so many brains.
But as far as like headless CMSs, I've done most of my work with Strappy and Sanity. And like with both of them, my favorite thing is just like how easy it is for me to understand how to customize the UI. So like when I have to, you know, especially like, so I have a side project, asianaddy.com, that is just basically like, we're just bringing a place for all the Asian restaurants in the Cincinnati tri-state area to like have a place. We're a nonprofit. We just like put it together. And it's constantly people are like, yeah, but you know what else it needs in the UI? We need to say that it has this. And it's just like, all right. And it's like 3 lines of code. And so like, I just like that I can do that and do it in the code side, like through my code editor, like through the CLI, and the people who are entering the data have no idea. They don't have to look at the code. They don't have to figure out what I just did. They're like, oh, that text input is there now. Great.
Yep. Very nice. Yeah, some of those modern headless CMSs like are very slick. I like them a lot.
Well,
WP Engine-
and Strappy is open source, right? So it's
oh, is it? Sweet.
yeah, you don't have to like Prismic. They have a free license, but if you as your site scales, you have to pay. So I mean, you know, you have to weigh the options there. But Strappy is really nice if you have a team of developers who are pretty well versed in it.
Yeah. If any of you have a chance to try out WordPress as a headless CMS, I think you'll find like one of the pain points at the moment is creating something that other CMSs would have the concept of, which is your data models. You know, so in WordPress, it's like there's one plugin that you can install to define or register some what they call custom post types, which is like a model, and then also taxonomies, which is a way of grouping, you know, those together. And then you have to go find some other plugin that allows you to have metadata, like fields associated with those, and then another one to expose those in the GraphQL CLI. There's like so many kind of puzzle pieces you have to put together to get this system working. So one of the things we're working on is called Atlas Content Modeler, which will, you know, the goal is to have WordPress, you know, achieve something that's similar to a lot of these headless CMSs, where you can just define your data model, all the fields, any taxonomies that they have for grouping things together, and even like one-to-one or one-to-many relationships, and just hit save. You know, and that one tool would do kind of all of that work for you, in addition to adding those things to your GraphQL schema. So it should be a really good experience. You know, when that it's out now, but it's kind of a beta. It's like kind of early stages for that.
Early, yeah.
My other thought here is like with Gutenberg. Are you all familiar with that in the WordPress world? Have you heard of the Gutenberg block editor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is the big thing in WordPress. If you remember, like when you had used it a few years ago, like traditional WordPress, as you said, do you remember short codes with the square brackets? Yeah, I'm seeing some head nods.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was always like you had to kind of imagine what your content was going to look like downstream. You know, like I have a few paragraphs, and then I know that these square brackets where I have these, it looks like kind of pseudocode, or I'm passing in different attributes. I know that when that renders to the user, it's going to look like this other thing, like a stock ticker that pulls live data or whatever it may be, you know, but you had to hold that in mind, and you couldn't actually see it. You know, it wasn't the greatest experience. So Gutenberg kind of does away with that. Now it's all based on React. So if you say, I want my stock ticker block to be at this point, you'll see an actual stock ticker that's updating in real time. The thing that the user would see at the end of the day, you get to see as you're editing. So that's pretty cool. It's providing a good experience. But there's still some pain points there with like getting those, rendered in the front end.
I'd say it's similar pain points that you might run into with Notion, where you're taking random notes that they look like just blobs of text. Gutenberg still has issues similar to that.
Yeah, brave new world, but I think some great strides are being made.
Text editing, you'd think that we would have figured it out by now. It's 2021. Come on. But it's always so difficult because there's always new ways of people doing it, and you want to keep using WYSIWYG editors and stuff. It gets complex, and so
right.
I'm not surprised that it's something that's a work in progress, but it's definitely something where, again, it's like audio issues in calls and stuff. It's just a perpetual problem we'll have until the end of time.
It's always those things that you think will be easy. You're like, oh, we have this mastermind idea for this thing, this library that we're going to make it, this everything we need it to do. What are we going to name it? And then 2 weeks go by.
Yeah.
Right. You're like, shouldn't this be the easiest detail?
Exactly.
Picking it. It is not, turns out. So cool. That was super insightful to hear from y'all on that stuff. Next, I kind of wanted to go rapid fire, like through each of you in your area of specialty, or the framework that you work most in, and ask if you've ever if you've come across like projects in the wild, for React, Vue, and Angular where WordPress is being used as a data source, to pull data in. I know, like for Angular, Tara, I know it seems to be, at least from what I've heard out there, it seems to be very industry specific. Like I think in government, like Angular is really popular. And a friend of mine works in the educational system, and he says like, oh yeah, all of the web apps that our teachers and principals and staff use to manage their curriculum and classrooms or whatever, all Angular, like they've adopted that very, very heavily. But I've heard less of that in the open source software space, the mom and pop shop or the publishers. Like, have you seen those?
It's definitely
kinds of sites?
Well, so it's definitely more of a enterprise level framework. It's like, it's like that in Disney. But I did, because of this podcast, I was like, let me look into that. And there was a site that had listed a few, and the Guggenheim is Angular and Headless WordPress. The Guggenheim Museum maybe not as exciting to everybody else, but one of my favorite authors of all time is Murakami, and his website is on Angular and Headless WordPress. Funnily enough, though, I think that both of those, I don't know if they said it wrong or like typed it wrong, but the author was saying that it's actually Angular JS and Headless WordPress, which I wouldn't be too surprised. The amount of sites that are still on Angular JS that are like big sites, like I think even like a lot of major car brand, like nice car brands are on Angular JS, but nonetheless, there are some not what you would guess sites that are Angular JS and WordPress.
Yeah. Interesting.
Or Angular and WordPress.
Yeah. How about you, Cassidy? Have you heard of that, the pairing of React and WordPress, and like some examples there?
I don't have named examples like Tara did, but I have seen that quite often in nonprofit websites, actually. Or quite a few nonprofits, they'll have some kind of React and WordPress backend for their events pages and things like that. Yeah.
Very cool. And Ben, how about in the Vue world? I mentioned Drew Baker, who had interviewed. His agency uses Nuxt, and they even have their own starter, framework that they use, built-in Nuxt that they use for their project. So that'd be one example. But do you have some others you've seen?
Well, so the interesting thing about the Vue and WordPress community is that because Vue can be leveraged really as a progressive enhancement tool, it's kind of hard to pinpoint, like, because some of them call it more hybrid, where they sprinkled Vue in on certain server-side pages. So that would technically be like a Vue WordPress pairing. Like similar to Cassidy, I don't have any sort of explicit ones to call out where they use it entirely with like split off the headless with the CMS with Vue. But typically, yeah, I've seen it really popular with sort of the nonprofit, even agency space, where they're like the editors, like you said, the marketing publishers, they're used to that workflow. So that's why I think that tool has kind of been like the legacy throughout the business case. And then when they had like the development team to like and the money, then they brought in to start slowly splitting that off. But
Right.
I think we probably, if we had statistics, probably would see more progressive enhancement from a Vue side. And probably eventually we'll see more headless WordPress with Vue. It's just, I think it hasn't been as popular just because of when people start brand new projects, they're usually starting with probably like some of the other headless CMSs like out of the gate. And so that's where I've sort of seen a bit of the dichotomy in that.
And
I think that's a very similar case with React. There are many people using WordPress with React as just kind of like a piecemeal thing, even in traditional WordPress sites.
Yeah.
Nice.
Cool. And I understand the next major version of Vue has some like big updates, right? Including something akin to Next.js's ISR, incremental static regeneration kind of stuff, where you can like refresh pages individually, like by route.
Yeah, Next.3 is coming with a lot of different enhancements. Yeah, for better support for serverless functions and that kind of thing. So yeah, it should be exciting things. We're looking forward to it.
That's cool. That'd be great. I've talked to people who use that pairing and say that that's one thing they wish. They're like, we can go all static or all SSR, but having, you know, the ability to go route by route would be cool. So they have that to look forward to.
I think hybrids. Yeah, go ahead.
No, please.
I was just going to say, yeah, I think we'll see more of the hybrid model going forward. And rather than people, once again, speaking of like pure static versus like pure SSR, right? Like there are, I think, new things that are coming, which I'm going to let Cassidy take over from here.
Thanks, Ben. So
over to you.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that I did want to bring up is there's an RFC in the Jamstack repo, if anybody wants to check it out, for a concept called distributed persistent rendering. And it's a concept that can work not just in Next, not just in Nuxt, but in any framework where you can do this sort of route by route types of distributed, just kidding, but like choosing which routes you want to pre-render completely and which routes you want to render on demand. And what's cool about it is it's very similar to ISR. And actually, if you deploy Next.js to Netlify, it uses this method of pages amazing. Where you can choose your kind of critical pages, where your critical pages are the ones that are always static pre-rendered upfront. And then you have your deferred pages, where these are pages that don't necessarily need to be rendered as a part of the build initially, but then once it's queried by a user, then it's added to the build. And then it doesn't change once it's added to the build. So you still retain those immutable deploys and atomic deploys. And so it doesn't change once it's in the build. But it's kind of a cool concept, because then if you do have millions or thousands of pages and you don't want your build times to take 10 minutes every time you update your site, you can have those core pages where you can have a short build time and then pages added later. And the way it's designed, the way the architecture is designed, is it can be used with any framework. And then at Netlify in particular, we implement it with something called on-demand builders. And we can share the docs for that in the show notes.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, that makes me think of of Gatsby, which is a popular framework that people use when they're building headless WordPress sites. And I don't know what the current status is of it, but for a long time, one of the pitfalls of it was, hey, everything needs to be static. We're going to generate all these static pages at build time. Right. And if I have a huge publication with thousands of posts or something, it's going to take forever to build my site. And so now they're gradually working in like, okay, you can have something that ties into when you publish a post and stuff like that. But you definitely need a hybrid model or a distributed model of re-rendering pages that are not as important as, say, your homepage or something like that.
Right. Yeah. If you look up Eleventy, another static framework, Zach Leatherman, the core maintainer of Eleventy, he posted a few videos of how fast his site was able to get by using this kind of model. And it was incredible because he was able to defer just like images, for example, where there's a ton of post-processing that he had to do for compressing images and making sure the right sizes were served. And by doing it that way and delaying how the cache works and stuff, all of those fun words that we love, he was able to reduce his build time, I think, like by 11 minutes or something per build. And that's significant, especially if you're doing quite a few deploys. And he was able to do this with thousands and thousands of pages with images. And it was really impressive to see. That
is very cool. I'm wondering how like cache invalidation works. Like Will referenced Gatsby a minute ago, which, it has support for incremental static regeneration. Sorry, I'm getting my wires crossed. That would be next terminology, but incremental builds is what I meant to say there for Gatsby. And the idea there is like they know, because of this unified GraphQL data layer, Gatsby knows, in air quotes, where all the data is used across your whole site. So if like one piece of data changes, it knows all of these single post pages and these post archive pages, they're the ones affected. So we'll, invalidate the cache for those and regenerate only those pages. Which seems cool and seems powerful to me. So with distributed dynamic rendering, you had the words right there.
Distributed persistent rendering. You could just do DPR.
Thank you.
It's shorter.
Distributed persistent rendering, DPR. With DPR, like, is there any concept of that? Does it know where the data lives, or is it time-based? Like it'll just refresh things.
So it's not time-based. You do define those pages up front, where this page will be a deferred page. This thing will be deferred. This one is critical, where it's part of the build. If data is changing in that page, let's just say you have a deferred page that a user hasn't hit yet, that means it hasn't been added to the build yet. And so it can be updated and things can happen no matter what. But once it's served to the user, it's a part of the build. And so once it's served to the user, the build does not change, but just the pages that haven't been added to the build yet can change. And then if you do want to have new data update and stuff, that's when you just trigger a new build, and then those deferred pages are undefined again. And so it's a different way of caching, but it prevents users from seeing different information. Because the one problem with stale rel validate caching, that's something that we've had customers run into issues with. I've run into issues with it personally, is your URL isn't necessarily a source of truth, because someone could be seeing the stale page and someone could see the updated page depending on when they go to that page. And so if you deploy some kind of bad color logo or something, and then you change it on the back end, you have to wait for that cache to reset, instead of just the whole build updating for everyone. And so some people might see the old version, some people might see the new version. And we've had that issue with some customers where they really liked the stale while we validate approach because of the short build times and everything, but they weren't able to debug some of their users' issues because it was part of that invalidated state, that stale state that needed to be updated. And it's not a huge problem because the user could probably just refresh a few times and they'll get to a good state, but it's still an issue where caching is hard. We've already talked about how naming things is hard. The other thing is caching. So there you go.
Got all our bases covered.
Speaking of naming things, when you mentioned DPR, and I look forward to this in the future, all I could think of is Princess Bride and Dread Pirate Roberts. And so I look forward to the DPR-based memes around all that.
Perfect. And I'm so happy you brought that up. This next segment.
you know who's on this call. They're probably taking notes.
Yeah.
Next week, wait for the memes to drop. Very good, very good.
We also need to make some kind of caching thing with ROUSs then.
Yes.
Yeah. Rodents of unusual size. Yeah.
Of course.
Anyone?
So next, I wanted to talk about what Jamstack might be lacking. So for our listeners out there who may not be aware, our guests today have their own podcast, which is remotely interesting. But seriously, the name of it is remotely interesting. It's very good. I listen to it all the time. And a recent favorite of mine are the two episodes where you did what is the Jamstack great for and ideal for, and what can it do now? And then you did a companion episode. What is it not ideal for? Because as we talked about previously, toward the beginning of the episode here is, as you get more and more deeper into the tech world and more senior, you find out the correct answer most of the time is it depends, right? So there are some cases where maybe a Jamstack architecture might not be the most ideal, one or the one that is needed for the particular thing. So with all that said, like if someone's going to use a headless CMS, like if they're choosing WordPress or another headless CMS solution, and pairing that with a front-end JavaScript framework, and that's their decoupled architecture of choice, what do you think they're giving up? Do you think there's are there disadvantages to that they need to keep in mind, beyond the advantages that we've talked about somewhat already?
Kara, it looks like you're about to say something really thoughtful.
No, it was the opposite, because I was like, I'm just such a positive thinker and I can't think of anything negative. Well, I think I honestly have just been in the space of so long of using headless CMSs that I think Ben is being negative.
Yeah, go Ben.
Well, not negative. I think
I'm just kidding.
Thing though, where you mentioned something where a key point here, I think a lot of people, when they think of Jamstack, they think of like the acronym where it first was originated with like the JavaScript API markup.
Right.
And I think that's why lately, for those who've noticed, the Jamstack has gone from like capital JAM stack to like capital JM stack, because we want to kind of focus more on the architectural approach and less on like whether you're using the things like and all the different pieces.
Yeah.
And so I think that once you're in the headless world, though, you kind of you are in the kind of like Jamstack realm, because you are decoupling things and you have this idea of like separation of concerns. And so I think the trade-off here is what Tara was mentioning before, was can your team support that in the long run? Because if it can't, then that is going to be it definitely become a problem, right? If you don't have a developer to stay on to make sure those things work. Otherwise, and that's why like I think a lot of nonprofits go the pure WordPress route, not even headless, because it's managed for them. They want to add something, they install a plugin, they click a button and it kind of does it for them. They can kind of manage it themselves. And so I think it's that knowing your client and audience as well as their tech familiarity and their time, I think will be the key in making that trade-off between the decoupled architecture versus the head-on architecture of WordPress.
Nice. We knew you could be negative if you tried hard enough. No, yeah, it's an excellent answer, right? It makes a lot of sense. I know on your episode, like a few of the things mentioned from what I recall, I believe Sarah Drasner brought up like cron jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Phil said, well, if you had a service, you had a backend service that was able to run cron jobs that your client could make calls to.
Yeah,
that's still Jamstack, right? So yeah, it seems like the those examples of things you can't do when you're like pre-rendering your pages and then doing rendering on the client and using third-party services are dwindling. They're getting more minimal.
It's very fluffy, where there's the core aspect of it is you build as much as you can up front and then you pull in data as needed. And that can mean almost anything. But if you build websites almost like the way you might build a mobile application, like iOS, Android, Windows Phone, or whatever, where if you build an application that way, typically you're building up a bunch of UI components. You're not actually server-side rendering anything in a mobile application. You're building as much as you can, and then you pull in the data when the user is actually opening your app and using it. And Jamstack web development is very similar in that you build as much as you can up front and then pull in the data and kind of use the browser as your operating system for that.
And I think like what Cassidy's saying with it being fuzzy is the fact that the Jamstack is maturing, and what comes with technology maturing is the ecosystem and the developers around it. So everybody that is like, oh, hey, I like this decoupling. I like how, headless or technology into the architecture. So, but I'm missing this thing. So as we tend to do, we build it. So you see more and more people joining the ecosystem with like, oh, this part that we didn't know was missing that we needed, or I'm going to, make builds better in this way, that way. So with that conversation of like, as long as somebody knows what's lacking, there's going to be that other person or other people that were like, okay, then let's fix that. Let's do something for that.
Right. Yeah. So with all that said, that I feel like that's a good lead in to talk about this next topic I'm kind of interested in, similar to the distributed persistent rendering stuff we talked about, which is kind of an exciting innovation that you folks over at Netlify are doing. Another one I've kind of had my radar on is Netlify Edge Handlers. And this one I think is pertinent to what we were just talking about, where you still want the benefits of the Jamstack and as much static pre-rendering as you can get away with for speed purposes. But you want some level of like personalization or customized data. So this is a cool idea to me. My understanding is this is logic, like code that you can run at the edge, so you can distribute the code itself across the CDN, and it's run at the edge and personalizes the page in some way before it reaches the user. So this could be used for things like language, right, where you're having to customize the page based on that user's spoken language, or if they have had like themed the application to have the header and footer be certain colors, or personalize it so that they're shown certain items. It seems to me, which is all very cool. It seems to me at a certain point it would be hard to do that without more data, without reaching back to some databases and go, yeah, but what is their purchase history so that I know what to show them? So like, I don't know, where does that? Can you guys give me? I'm sure you're more clued in to me. Like, what are some good examples of where you could use that at the edge without having to reach, make a round trip back to the server to do useful things?
So the thing that edge handlers are taking advantage of is the redirect knowledge of the CDN. And so they're basically saying like, so you're never going to go back to that main server. You're going to go straight from the edge to the API. So you're kind of cutting down those calls back and forth. But there's like a lot that you can do with the knowledge of the headers, which is really nice. So like there is a lot of data in there that you can access to, so like some of the examples that we've talked about before, because I got really excited about these, and like the docs team in general was like, chill out about it because I can't do everything. And I'm like, I know, but I'm excited. But like some things that you can like, so like say you have, an ad that you want people to get a certain discount on something at a certain time of the day, but dependent on their time zone is when they get that discount. So you can get that information from what their time zone is and then send a specific component or like template back to them that is displayed to only them in that time zone at that particular time. So, there's things like that with geolocation and with time that's like, a lot of conditional programming you can do on top of that.
Another cool example I've seen is voter registration. Like this past fall, even on the Netlify homepage, we did something like that where if you came in from the US, depending on the state that you're in, it would show you voter registration information at the top of the site for your given state. And so that was really, really cool to just witness different people being able to say, oh yeah, I could use that. And it made an actual impact in the world.
Yeah.
The one that we talked about, I think it was this last Jamstack. I hate to say the C word like on a podcast, but COVID results for each area that you were in. So I think it was like, it would like let you know what your numbers were in the area that you were coming from.
Yeah. And so it's doing that at the edge, and you get the availability of headers that are closer to the person using the site.
To the user,
and you can do that rather than doing some sort of client side browser based validation of where they are.
And all this stuff is blurring the lines, right? When Matt Billman and Phil came out with the modern web development on the Jamstack book, and went through kind of their idea, the idea behind that architecture and atomic deploys and all the stated the case for why they think that's a great architecture. Now it seems like with Next.js and some of the things that you all are supporting now on Netlify, and then stuff like Edge Handlers, like a lot of those lines are being blurred where you can still do pretty dynamic stuff like that and still shoehorn it into part of the Jamstack and kind of conforming to that original mission, which is cool.
Yeah. By the way, if you like Tara's voice, she did the audiobook for that. So
I did not know. Is that true?
Yeah, and I gave a sample to the team, but like nobody had heard what I had done. And I was like, oh, here's a sample so you know what it sounds like. And I was like, first you make a file, less than sign, H, capital T, capital M, capital L. And I'm just so curious if anybody like in the company was like, we paid her to do that.
Sure, it sounds fantastic.
I swear I don't read too much code out loud in there.
I mean, that's just brutal trying to read code in an audio format, right? It's always painful.
There's a reference PDF for the code.
It brings me back to my first a coding class, like way back in high school, and how my teacher would never, he wouldn't necessarily say the what he means. So it's like he'd just be, we're typing the command line. He'd be like, oh yeah, you just cd some directory, some other directory, and you're sitting there like you don't even know what a terminal is, and and you're like, okay, well, please explain this in it like letter by letter.
CD what? C. So what am I seeing? C.
Yeah,
what?
exactly.
Gosh, where's the any key? Yeah.
What button do I need to mash?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, at this point in the video, we've gotten through the meat of the episode and questions that we wanted to ask you folks. So I thought now we'd talk about just like things that you're excited about in the modern JavaScript, modern web dev community. One thing on my list is Astro. I want to ask you like what y'all think about that. I know like Cassie, you've been doing a lot of content on Astro, and I think it's really cool in concept to be able to do these like still writing components, but ship no JavaScript or defer it and ship the minimal amount you can when the user scrolls into view or however you've chosen to async load that or whatever. So I think that in concept is very cool. Whether it's ready for prime time for like large sites, I don't know, but like, what do you think, Cassie? Does that have legs? Does that have potential?
Yeah, I think it does have legs just because they have a lot of really good ideas behind it and because it's really fast. And so it's built by the authors who made Snowpack, and there's a lot of really good ideas behind it. And the API has been changing a bunch. Like since I first started using it like a month and a half ago to now, some of my code doesn't work anymore just because they have been doing a lot of updates, but they've been really smart updates. And I really like the fact that I can write in React in a way that I'm very comfortable and still get an application that can be fully static and like hydrated as needed, JavaScript pulled in as needed, very Jamstacky. And what's cool is because of how it's structured, the mental model is very similar to a lot of these other frameworks. And so I was able to convert a Next.js site to Astro really, really quickly because, again, the concepts are similar. It was really just a matter of changing some things from pulling from Next to just using native browser APIs and that sort of thing.
Yeah. That's cool. I talked to some people here internally about it, and they think the ideas are the most valuable thing, and that we may see frameworks emerge that bake that right in, rather than bringing your framework in Astro and pairing the two. It could be one experience where the framework just does that out of the box. It's got me thinking too about, I've been doing some like side project using SvelteKit, which is I'm having a lot of fun using that. But the thought of like using something like SvelteKit with Astro, it works. It's exciting to me. It seems like it would be incredibly fast, just because like unlike React and Vue where you're shipping the framework, like the whole runtime to do the VDOM diffing and all that stuff, Svelte just compiles down to something so minimal. So if all you need is like a little interactivity in this one spot on your page, that'd be like so minuscule, wouldn't it?
Right. Yeah, no, it's really, really cool. And the ideas that I've been thinking about with it is being able to have like multiple pages defined, but then have one of them just be a full client-side rendered application where you can build a full web app and stuff, but then have a marketing page that's fully static, and then also have like authentication being pulled in. And it's almost like a return to monolithic style because it would be all in one repo, but it's still very Jamstacky because of how you render things and stuff. It's a very interesting concept that I like a ton. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. The folks behind it between Astro and Pika Pack and Snowpack, like seem like they're doing very, very cool things on the web. That's cool. Supabase is another one I think, Cassie,
Yeah.
you've been into lately. And I have two. I have a side project where I'm trying that out and enjoying that.
I used to really like Firebase, and then it was gobbled up by a giant company that changed some stuff. And so I'm very excited about Supabase because it's kind of a return to that very open source nature of it. And it works really well. I've been really excited about it.
Yeah.
So what, I know of Supabase, but I haven't used it at all. What are the differences between it and Firebase right now, or like, major differences apart from the fact that Supabase is open source?
Cassie?
I mostly just like how so first of all, it is open source. And so the way that they build features is very community centric. And honestly, that's the most exciting thing for me. Like, for example, someone wanted to have Discord OAuth in it. And that's not something that you could just say, hey, Firebase, include that. But someone just built it in Supabase, and now they have Discord OAuth as a sign-in option for their authentication tool. And so having that behind it, it's been growing in such a cool way. And I've just loved seeing projects built with it because of those kinds of quick features that people have been able to implement, and the community has been able to come together to test and battle test, I guess, too.
That is so cool. Yeah, and they just introduced, was it last week or the week before? They just started their own Discord server now. So if you are looking for support or other people doing similar work, I was so excited to see that, because I was just like reading through docs and not finding much online. I'm like, I want to talk to somebody about this. So I'm glad that they rolled that out. That's pretty cool. Another distinction, Will, is Firebase is a NoSQL database behind it, whereas Supabase is Postgres behind the scenes. But yeah, I like one of the big selling points for me is the fact that it's open source and you could self-host it if you wanted to, because with Firebase, it feels like you're like, here you go, Google. I'm like, if you quadruple your prices, I just have to pay that, or otherwise, rewrite everything. It would be a big overhaul to rewrite it some other way. Whereas with Supabase, it's like, if the pricing doesn't work, or I want to move elsewhere, you actually could. So that part of it is appealing to me. So.
Yeah, I think the data, when you're working in something like Firebase like that, I mean, you can move the data and it's a struggle, but you can do it. The security rules are where it becomes incredibly challenging here if you need to move to another platform.
Gotcha. Well, anything else we missed? Like, is there some up and coming web tech you all are excited about and people can look forward to seeing some content on from you?
I'm personally really excited about a new builder called Vite. So it's around the ES build technology.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So VITE for those who are listening. And so it's just really nice to see kind of the web dev community kind of sort of circling around that as far as like the frameworks. So it's not like a Vue thing, even though it's written by Evan Yu, who created Vue. Like there's Svelte stuff in it, Vue, React. And it's just like, it's nice to see everyone just working towards a common goal.
And it's so fast.
It's so
fast. It's mind-blowingly fast.
It is amazing. Yeah. All right. Well, we can wrap things up unless you folks wanted anything else to cover anything else. We good? All right. Well, with that, how about we'll just end on a note, just letting folks know where they can go to find more of your content and that of the developer experience team.
We have the Netlify blog.
Yes.
What is it? blog.netlify.com.
Netlify.com/blog.
Oh gosh, yes, that what she said.
Explorers.
That one the blog has a bunch of like really great tutorials. I'm always amazed when I go on there because I think I know what this team does, and then I'll be on there and we're like, what, we covered that. But Explorers is explorers.netlify.com, and remotely interesting is remotelyinteresting.netlify.com. So you can see where I got confused. Okay.
I'm sorry, Tara.
And I know like most of my work is found in my GitHub repo. Surprisingly, it's all like templates and workshops, but that's TZ Mannix on GitHub. That's me.
You can find me at Cassidy, CASSIDOO, on most things, or you could Google Cassidy Williams and you'll see me in a Scooby-Doo character, and I am not the Scooby-Doo character.
So she
Nice.
says. I haven't seen them in the same room at the same time.
It's because I think the character died actually.
Oh gosh,
Oh,
Cassidy, it just
Ew.
got dark.
Well,
I'm sorry.
on that positive note, you can find me on all the Internet of Things under the moniker Ben Code Zen. And yeah, happy to see y'all there.
Well, great. We'll wrap things up then. Thank you so much for coming on and spend some time talking about Jamstack and headless WordPress and that intersection with us and some things you're excited about as well at the end there. So we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.